Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Center for the Study of Organized Hate for this panel discussion on India Hate Lab's 2024 report on hate speech events in India. Before we begin the event, I would like to let everyone know that this event will be recorded. The report documents 1,165 verified hate speech events targeting Muslims and Christians across 20 states, 2 union territories, and the National Capital Territory of Delhi. A staggering 74.4% increase in hate speech events targeting religious minorities in India in 2024. Today we have Rakib Hamid Nayak and Rohit Chopra, lead authors of the report, to discuss findings and implications. So this is meant to be an interactive session, so please do send questions throughout the conversation. Rakib Hamid Nayak is the founder and executive director of the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, and Dr. Rohit Chopra is a professor in the Department of Communications at Santa Clara University and has been a visiting scholar at the Center for South Asia at Stanford University. So I will now hand the mic to Rakib and Rohit to speak about the report.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diksha, and thank you to everyone who joined this event. Um, so our 2024 report highlights a very troubling escalation in hate speech events in the country throughout the year, and we have documented 1,165 in-person hate speech events. And we're talking about some of these events attended by tens of thousands of people, especially in states like Maharashtra, where the mobilization it was, of course, partly related to the state elections that the state witnessed in November, and led by Sakal Hindu Samaj, a coalition of far-right organizations in the state. So this troubling escalation of hate speech was witnessed across 20 Indian states, 2 union territories, and the national capital of Delhi. And I think almost across all states, we witnessed a rise in hate speech in comparison to what we recorded in 2023. What we also, which was kind of a very troubling aspect of the entire report, was the fact that out of these 1,165 events, 22% had calls for violence, which we categorize as dangerous speeches. So these dangerous speeches calls for either ethnic cleansing or resorting to brutal violence against Muslim and Christian minorities across the country. And when we say 22%, it's a very significant number. So all these speeches were delivered mostly by the members of Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Bajrang Dal, but also the Hindu monks, the Hindu religious leaders who have followings in millions, in some cases tens of millions of people follow them, revere them throughout the country. And the second aspect was some of the BJP ruled states, where most of these hate speech events were concentrated. States like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra were the top 3 hotspots of hate speech in 2024. And these states collectively accounted for almost 47% of all the hate speech events that we recorded throughout the year. And when it comes to the top 10 states with the highest rate of hate speech events, 7 were ruled by the BJP, either directly or in coalition with other regional parties. And when we categorized each of those events across multiple key themes and narratives that were pushed throughout the years, some of the most glaring ones were the conspiracy theories like love jihad, land jihad, rail jihad, population jihad, all these kind of bogey terms to demonize, criminalize, and dehumanize Muslim minorities. And then there was a call to socially and economically boycott Muslims, calls to remove, seize, or destroy places of worship. And that also saw a significant escalation in 2024. And there were also calls to target and commit violence against the Rohingya refugees living in the country, and also the weaponization of this quote unquote Bangladeshi infiltrator bogey to target Muslims living in India. And particularly, we have seen this term used to demonize and question the citizenship status of Muslims of Bengali origin, especially from Indian Muslim citizens of West Bengal and the state of Assam. Um, um, so apart from this, when we looked at the top purveyors of hate speech throughout the year, strikingly, unlike 2023, we found that the top six leaders, key figures who delivered most hate speeches in 2024 were politicians. And we're talking about some of the powerful politicians in the country holding the top constitutional positions. People like Narendra Modi, who's the Prime Minister of the country, Home Minister Amit Shah, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma. These were some of the key figures who delivered hate speech after hate speech during the general elections. In some speeches, they would make very veiled remarks against Muslims, but in others, they would be very blatant about their hate and bigotry towards Muslims. And then the infamous speech of Prime Minister Modi in Banswara, Rajasthan, where he referred to Muslims as infiltrators and those who produce more kids. Those anti-Muslim dog whistling, that anti-Muslim dog whistling and tropes were then replicated by the BJP's rank and file throughout the country. And once the focus, kind of the media attention and the societal attention at large on that speech, when that waned away, they just unleashed this hate and bigotry targeting Muslims throughout the country, going unnoticed. But we made sure that we record most of these incidents, and I would say, and we have mentioned in our methodology, that this is not the overall number. I mean, all the number of hate speeches that took place inside the country. This is an attempt to record and document as many hate speeches that we could possibly collect through different means and measures. And one thing that was also very striking in 2024 was how hate speech in India has kind of, evolved over the years. Now, it's not just a bottom-up phenomena where you will have far-right figures on the ground, small right-wing figures or small-level BJP leaders, state-level BJP leaders delivering hate speeches, but also top-down phenomena where you have national leaders of the BJP, the Prime Minister of the country, the Home Minister of the country, indulging in blatant anti-Muslim rhetoric in almost every other speech. So hate speech in India is now both a top-bottom and bottom-up phenomena, with minorities, Muslims and Christians being their primary targets. So I'll just stop there and I'll let Rohit jump in. I know Rohit has a lot to say about this report.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deeksha and Rakib. And Rakib has, introduced the key findings of the report and covered it and pointed to some of the trends related to the alarming jump in hate speech and, as you pointed out, dangerous speech, which is specifically speech that calls for violence against specific groups. So it's a subset of hate speech. I just want to complement what Rakib has said by mentioning two sort of different sets of things. The first is, we've already got some pushback against the report. The report has got extensive coverage in the global press. We've got, some of the usual pushback on social media about this being, anti-India or being anti-BJP. And I had someone, I think it's a professor from a university, call me rabidly anti-Hindu and so on. Just read the report is what I would say to anyone who's a critic or someone who's interested. The methodology is absolutely rigorous and sound. I won't go into the granular details again, but just to mention briefly, like every incident that's been referred to is publicly documented. It's been triple verified. And as I think, we mentioned in the report in the 2024 or the 23, this probably means that the number of documented incidences that we have analyzed in the report are probably a conservative figure. So it's likely that there are more incidents which did not, because we could not triple verify them. We didn't count them. The report is objective. It states facts. Many of the events by prominent speakers that are mentioned in the report are things that the international press itself commented on extensively, such as Mr. Modi's remarks or Mr. Himanta Biswa Sarma's remarks and so on. And just want to mention that, given what the mandate of the center is, we really study organized hate in all its forms. So we've also done reports on cow vigilante violence promoted by influencers on Instagram. We did a report on anti-Indian hate on X, including anti-Hindu hate, but not limited to anti-Hindu hate directed at South Asians, that people perceived to be of Indian origin, in the wake of remarks that Vivek Ramaswamy had made a couple of months ago. So we followed the same principles, and we followed the United Nations definition and so on. So we are very open to critique in the spirit of inquiry and conversation, but the facts, as they say, are plain for all to see. The second point I'll just make in a couple of minutes, and then we can keep the conversation going, is as someone who's still at this point have spent more than half my life in India, political violence has not been new to India. Regrettably, that's been part of the history of post-colonial India. But something has shifted in political culture. One of the things that's been particularly distressing, and one of the implications which we point out to, is this normalization of hate in the mainstream of Indian political culture and the mainstream of Indian political society. So very often it might be easy to see, Narendra Modi or Amit Shah as the architects of this, and there is perhaps an element of truth in the power that they exercise, given the power that they exercise, the comments that they make. But it's also a reflection of, I think, something sort of deeply disturbing in Indian society at large. And the majority of the hate speech events were definitely perpetrated in BJP-ruled states by the BJP and their allies, and the direct participation of the Prime Minister and Home Minister is extremely alarming. A few were in non-BJP-ruled states. Atishi Marlena, I believe, made a remark about Rohingya children of Rohingya refugees using seats and so on. Equally disturbing is the fact that the opposition parties, for the most part, don't counter this narrative and rhetoric, which essentially means that to speak up for the rights of minorities, for Muslims and Christians, has become itself politically toxic in India. And that, I think, is a really, really alarming and dangerous development. And then the final point I will make, which our report stresses, well, I'll make 2 points. One, Rakib already made, just to re-stress it, that these kind of extreme sentiments, if you look at, in the late 80s, the lead up to the demolition of the Babri Masjid, you would actually have these gangs of vigilantes, Hindu far-right vigilantes. They would drive their jeeps through the street of UP at night, playing fake tapes with recordings of, Muslim, of allegedly Hindu women screaming at being attacked by Muslim men. And this was to whip up kind of anti-Muslim frenzy. And when you would have this kind of discourse, people who were supporters of the right of the BJP at that point of time would always say these are fringe elements. But now some of these fringe elements, through the structure of influencer culture, or through the fact that godmen of various tribes of Hindu godmen with political aspirations and a political base, have become much, much more sort of mainstream and center stage. So that's another, I think, really, really alarming development. The one more sort of aspect of the erosion of Indian secularism, which, imperfect as it may have been, was a genuine thing, is what I will say. And that's been one, very, I think, alarming shift. And finally, the abdication of the role of the Election Commission of India. I remember T.N. Seshan, who was the first election commissioner, who actually looked and saw at the powers that the election commissioner had, and set into motion, this code, which was followed scrupulously. And I remember a joke where someone asked T.N. Seshan that, are you not worried that the Shiv Sena or a Hindu far-right group will go after you? And Mr. Seshan was bald, and he said, they cannot harm a single hair on my head. And I remember that, getting a lot of coverage in the papers. But that was an institution that people relied on to safeguard Indian democracy. And I think the partisan behavior and the weak and cowardly behavior of the Election Commission of India has essentially been an enabling factor in normalizing this kind of hateful discourse. And similarly, the judiciary did take some steps, but in my personal opinion, just those were weak steps. And as we say, that they just directed the Election Commission. So it's really playing, a game of football, as it were, or passing the buck without anyone taking action. So which tells us something about the erosion of the legitimacy of institutions and the intertwining of the BJP with and the fusing of the BJP and the Hindu right with the organs of the state, with its discourse, including the ideology of Hindu nationalism, becoming more pervasive. So I'll just leave it at that.
So yes, Diksha, I'll just add to what Rohit mentioned about the lack of outrage by the opposition parties against the rising hate and bigotry targeting religious minorities. On top of it, I would also argue that that there is this broader social acceptance of hate speech or these conspiracy theories that are used to demonize and dehumanize minorities. And unfortunately, the weaponization of social media, the weaponization of traditional media to solidify some of these conspiracy theories is also a point of concern for us. That a lot of people in India right now believe these conspiracy theories to be true because they have been repeated so many times. Almost every day, the mainstream media channels will have debates on, for example, love jihad, that people have really started believing in, and they don't see any problem in the politicians, the country's top leaders repeating this rhetoric, these fake, bogus conspiracy theories to target minorities, and it has kind of normalized these hateful and bigoted sentiments towards minorities. And another point that I would want to touch upon is the role of social media platforms. We in 2024 we have seen they have played a very central role in serving as a medium of spreading, promoting, and amplifying hate speech in the country. And this is what we believe at the center. Nothing is offline anymore. Everything that is created online, it's they see it as content. It is meant for online audiences, and it is not meant for any specific region. It is meant for the entire country. Indians living in India and Indians living abroad, including in the United States and Canada. And the social media platforms have allowed those hate actors to weaponize the social media platforms. And in 2024, we were able to trace 995 videos of hate speech events back to the platforms where they were first uploaded or live streamed. And we have this entire section on the role of social media platforms in our report, where we look at how these far-right actors have this extensive network of accounts on Facebook primarily, followed by Instagram and then YouTube and then X. But Facebook has been primarily a very primary driver of hate speech in the country, with most of the tracked events being sourced back to Facebook itself, where these hate actors would use live stream option to just live stream their speeches, and then they are watched by tens of thousands of people, in some cases millions of people around the country. Speeches, especially the speeches of T. Raja Singh, who, by the way, is banned on. He's a BJP leader, a legislator from the state of Telangana. He's banned on Facebook, on the different Meta platforms, under Meta's dangerous individuals and organizations policy in 2020. So he cannot have any account. And all the accounts with his name are supposed to be blocked right away. But there are groups that his supporters run. I'm not sure. We haven't been able to investigate it. Perhaps we believe that it is something that his team manages, because he has a very robust network of fan pages on Instagram, on Facebook. Two of the top groups have over 1 million followers. All his speeches are shared there, the details about his events where he's going to speak. And he's among the top 3 leaders in 2024 who delivered most dangerous speeches. That means he's number 2 in India for speeches that call for violence against religious minorities, open violence against religious minorities, in some cases brutal violence, street justice. And the role of social media platforms has been very central. And when we out of these dangerous speeches, we pulled a smaller data set to report on these platforms using their online tools. And what we found was, out of all the videos that we had reported, Facebook was the only platform that just took 3 videos down. Rest, no one took any action against the reported videos. So that was like 98.3% inaction. And of course, there are multiple reasons why this inaction has been kind of, a central feature of these social media platforms operating in India. But this negligence raises some serious concerns about big tech's unwillingness to curb hate speech in India, and their inaction has allowed this hate to flourish unchecked and with dire consequences for minorities. Because online hate speech doesn't remain online; it has real-world consequences, and we have seen in India repeatedly over the many years how online hate speech could result in offline violence. And I think Delhi program in 2020 was one of the prime cases where we saw how social media platforms, especially live streams, were used to mobilize the mobs in the Muslim neighborhoods to attack them, to commit arson, to physically attack Muslim families and households. So this is something that we really need to talk about, because these social media platforms also offer incentive for these hate actors to live stream or share these videos of speeches, because it is also linked to the financial part, the money part. For example, on Instagram, when we did that co-vigilante report, and most of these vigilantes call themselves content creators. So they themselves acknowledge that this is something, a form of content for them, and they use send gift feature on Instagram to fundraise. And then they also, of course, those videos reach tens of thousands of people, in many cases millions of people, and they monetize off of it. And then we have seen how Monu Manisa used YouTube to promote these vigilante videos where he raised a good amount of money. So I think this is a very critical conversation that we need to have. Um, but I'll just leave it there. Diksha, over to you.
Thank you both so much for all of your insight. So thank you to everyone who has been sending questions in the chat. I've been reading them. So as I said earlier, please do send questions throughout the next 30 minutes so that we can, address your questions. So I want to ask you both. Someone asked about the status of support from international bodies like the EU and the UN. So they basically are talking about how it is clear that India will not correct the situation from within without external pressure. So I guess from their comments, I guess the question that I want to pose to you is yeah, like what can international bodies like the EU and UN do? Because clearly India, like this person said, is not really dealing with the situation with internally.
Okay. I can just respond sort of briefly to that before turning it over to Rakib. Well, we see what the problem is in India. The problem is that you have the state, which is, in its current incarnation as the BJP government, which is really the perpetrator here. And then what the EU can do is it can ask the state to take action. So how do you do that? You do that if there are organs of the state, for instance, a Human Rights Commission, which actually has teeth, or you have a well-developed human rights culture. Or, if the EU were to respond or the United Nations were to respond, you have enough of, I'd say, sort of a public response where the particular government in question feels compelled to take some action. Now, what its motivations are, one doesn't know. And the government will take action when it is in its interest to take action. So if you think about the case of the BJP, I think it's the low-level functionary Nupur Sharma, who had made some remarks about the Prophet Muhammad, some offensive remarks. Um, you know, you actually had a sort of fairly angry response from several Muslim majority countries, and then the BJP took some action against her, the BJP government, right? To me, so that's a very interesting kind of contrast and comparison. The second point is that, long before the BJP government, the Indian government has this habit of accusing a foreign hand. And even now, the conspiracy theories are out of control. Like, everything is a foreign conspiracy. In the Indira Gandhi era, there was the ubiquitous foreign hand. And now it is, some sort of elaborate conspiracy involving this institution, that individual. So they immediately raise this question of sovereignty, and then they, turn out these sort of rote remarks about how minorities are, happy and safe and joyful under Mr. Modi's rule and so on. And all of this is a fabrication when the international media has, for the better part of 10 years, documented extensively that that's really not the case. I think the pressure works better behind the scenes. I'm not privy to, what goes on, obviously, but I think it's that there are some sort of, there's some sort of indication to believe that behind the scenes pressure does get them to, slow down or roll back on things like CA or NRC. I think part of the problem is that these kinds of sentiments, hateful sentiments, or a central aspect of the problem are now, they are absolutely linked to the generation of political capital and electoral reward. So even if there is some sort of impact behind the scenes so that India can publicly save face and so on, or doesn't appear to be chastised publicly, thus undermining Mr. Modi's, Vishwaguru or strongman image and so on. If it works, to whatever extent it works, I think in the context of elections, it wouldn't particularly work. And Rakib is much more familiar with this aspect of the sort of larger political economy of combating hate through international organizations. So I'll just leave it to him.
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. I believe that EU very well knows what is going on the ground. They're meeting with civil society. I mean, I know organizations, individuals who have been repeatedly briefing the EU and the member states of what is going on in the country. And in fact, our hate speech report, it's accessible to any and everyone. It's out there on CNN, BBC. I think many lawmakers must have read it. So everyone knows it. And in fact, here in the US as well, last year, during the release of International Religious Freedom Report by Secretary Blinken, while referring to India, he mentioned specifically about hate speech, and the report did mention our data from 2023 in the report. In fact, the UN's Human Rights Office as well, they mentioned about the concern around hate speech. So they are very well aware of the ongoing hate and the culture of hate speech in the country. But it's just that the political will, whether that will is there to act or not. And I think that political will is lacking right now among the countries around the world. So I'll just leave it to that. But I would say that when it comes to holding the big tech accountable for their complicity in the ongoing hate in the country, I think there are avenues in the EU that people of Indian diaspora, South Asian diaspora can use. In this particular case is the Digital Services Act that requires these platforms to address the use of their platforms to promote systemic risks against the society at large. So I think those measures are there that could potentially be used to hold these companies accountable. There are very strong regulations. And I think the diaspora, Indian diaspora, can significantly leverage that to address some of these concerns on the role of social media platforms.
Yeah, thank you both. So I'm going to segue to another question. I want to ask you both, are there examples of hate speeches getting a judgment in Indian courts?
I can take that question. Unfortunately, judiciary has shed its role to enforce rule of law. In 2024, we have this particular section in the report about the judicial and legislative developments throughout the year. And we saw people approaching courts repeatedly, particularly in respect to Prime Minister Modi's hate speeches. And every time those petitions were dismissed. In fact, in the state of Maharashtra, where Nitish Rane and T. Raja Singh, who delivered the most dangerous speeches that include call for violence, violence against minorities, those petitions were removed. And in fact, the police that had initially filed the FIR, they came to the court and said some of the hateful language that they had used wasn't hateful at all. In that particular case, the targeting of Rohingya Muslims, using terms like jihadi as an umbrella term to accuse Muslims of all these different kinds of jihads. And the police claim that these terms that these leaders use do not count as hate speech because Rohingyas aren't Indians to begin with. So, and in another case, which has been ongoing in the Supreme Court for almost 2 years now, was filed by a petition filed by a journalist in India named Shaheen Abdullah. And in that particular case, the lawyers have submitted a lot of evidence, in fact, a lot of evidence that we also provided to them. And court just made observations, like some strong observations, but nothing as in to force the state police that manages law and order in the states to enforce those laws strictly or have I mean for violations of those orders the court hasn't done anything because there was this one order where the court asked police to file compulsory FIRs. So in many of these BJP states they wouldn't file FIRs, but in some of the states they would. And even those FIRs are just on the paper. So they would just file FIR and they would just sit on it. So unfortunately, that's the case. But I think the courts have been pretty much active in targeting people who have been doing this work on documenting and combating hate speech. Like our organization, India Hate Lab, our project, it was banned in 2024, January 2024, by the India's Ministry of Electronics and Technology. Our website is banned in India. People cannot access our website. And ironically, they accuse us of spreading hate speech when we are the one that are documenting the hate speech by their leaders, by the leaders of the BJP and their affiliates. And I mean, this is just a new reality in India where hate is not just tolerated but rewarded and celebrated, while those like us and others, Mohammed Zubair, who expose and combat, are silenced and punished. And we have an ongoing case in the Delhi High Court against the government. It's been almost a year now, and there is no headway. I mean, it's just like hearings after hearings, and nothing has come up as of now. So unfortunately, as I said earlier, the court has abdicated its role as enforcer of the law.
Yeah, thank you, Rakib. I will move on to the next question in just respect for time. So someone asked, has Facebook or other social media platforms where this hate speech is broadcast responded to these claims or engaged with India Hate Lab or the center?
I'll take that question. Facebook hasn't reached out to us directly, but they did respond to this piece by the Washington Post on a report where the Meta's spokesperson said that they have they have policies against dehumanizing content, and they're going to take a look at the report and take action. But I can tell you from a past experience, the Cow Vigilante report, that was just the glaring evidence of the brutal violence perpetuated on minorities, the suspicion of consuming beef or transporting cattle, and that was all visual. Still, when we reported it, nothing was taken down. And when journalists reached out, they said, once the report is out, we'll take action. So what they did was, whatever examples were mentioned in the report, because we had also put in the links for everyone to see, to make sure, for the sake of transparency as well, for people to see that this was real. And when the report came out, Meta took down all the examples. Like they removed those posts, but they never reached out to us for the broader data set, which was over 1,000 Cow Vigilante accounts. And same is with this particular report. They would tell media that they will look at the report, but I don't think they're interested at all in addressing the issue of hate speech on their platforms. On the contrary, I would say YouTube, their team has reached out to us yesterday. The team from YouTube, they have reached out and they have asked for the data set, and they are willing to address hate speech in the country. And I would say generally, I have seen when it comes to all the platforms, YouTube does address. In this particular case, they didn't. When we reported those videos on the platform, they didn't even took down a single video. I think they really need to work on their reporting mechanism, on how they deal with these reports, because a lot of this content, the speeches are in regional languages. So it's pretty clear that they don't have regional moderators, or to say, I think a lot of this moderation is AI led. So I think that is something they will really need to address when it comes to combating hate speech in the country.
And if I can just piggyback of that, I will mention that, I read something recently interesting thing, which said that Meta in particular is, it's known as a social media company, and of course it has assorted social media platforms, but fundamentally it is an advertising company. That's what its fundamental job is. And the model of engagement, whether in India or in the US or anywhere else, is really based on what gets the most views. There's an incentive for doing that. Second point about Meta is that it, wants markets. India is its biggest market by numbers, active monthly users for its various platform properties. And all the tech platforms to a different degree hide behind the idea of, we are following the laws of the country. Though that is also sort of spurious in a sense. It's a spurious argument because you can make a very strong case for these hate speech incidences violating sections 295A and 153 of the Indian Penal Code, and so on and so forth. But it should really sort of give us pause about this narrative that tech companies have put forth of themselves as the motto being, we want to build community for Meta, or don't be evil, or so on. And And really, that I think that argument doesn't really hold water, that we are just following the laws of the country, because the level of hate, the open calls to violence, and as alarmingly, the existence of these violent videos, this pornography of violence which circulates out there, right? The humiliation of a community, acts of murder, practically, of assault. This content is on there, and they, by their own policies, which they apply everywhere, if this violence was on any other category of human beings other than religious minorities, that's a politicized issue, they would take it down. But in that particular country, the powers that be are promoting an idea where they're saying this kind of hatred against minorities is legitimate, so they violate their own, or they refuse to follow their own standards. And I think they really have some soul searching to do. I don't have much hope for Meta, especially if you look at the kind of odious remarks Mark Zuckerberg has made in the American context with the recent political we were too politically correct, we abdicated masculinity. That goes down a different line. But I think that's just sort of a larger issue to sort of consider. For too long, people have bought and drunk the Kool-Aid about these tech companies fundamentally being good at heart, as it were, and they have to make profit and they have to deal with local issues. But I do think that they are more culpable than that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you both for your response to that question. And kind of, Rohit, I guess going off of your response, someone did ask, so in the American context, are you concerned that a second Trump administration will ease off on pressure on the Indian government in regards to hate speech? And this is like presuming that the Biden administration was critical of India, yeah.
I'll just go briefly first, and then Rakib can add some thoughts. Yeah, I think that'll happen. The first thing I want to say is I don't think the Biden administration was particularly proactive in this regard for one reason or another. At various points of time, they did sort of respond. They were concerned. But for instance, when Mr. Modi was visiting and delivered his address to, a full sort of Congress, both houses of Congress, as it were, I think the message was very clear. The Democrat rank and file also, that any criticism of Mr. Modi must be muted, right? And there was perhaps one kind of letter of protest about human rights violations by by Pramila Jayapal's office, again, like a fairly mild thing. A few people like Ilhan Omar, and there were some others who, didn't attend Mr. Modi's address and so on. It will benefit India in the sense that I don't think there is any special relationship, contrary to what Mr. Modi's so-called bhakts say. Trump is not particularly interested in, India any more than he's interested in any part of the world, despite his earlier claim that I love the Hindu, where he refers to Hindus as if it's this sort of generic tribe or community. So it will benefit India in the sense that, in generally, we are moving towards a more isolationist kind of philosophy in America, where the interests of Mr. Trump, Mr. Musk, and others are going to be sort of paramount. And I was just having a very interesting conversation with some friends about, are we seeing the end of the American empire? But whether we are or not, there is an inward turn, and that indifference will definitely help India. The one thing that may happen is that, with the violence against Christian groups, to the extent that, there are some Christian groups in the US who have some influence because they have some base out here, there may be some flickers of interest, but I really don't see. I don't see much shifting other than that indifference is probably going to work in favor of perpetrators of hate speech. And it's, with big tech, all the sort of people who are liberals and sang a liberal tune in Silicon Valley, close to where I work and close to where I live, Mark Andreessen, a bunch of other people, they shifted their Trump support for Mr. Trump because they were not very happy with the fact that the Biden-Harris administration was actually regulating big tech. So with even less regulation, which is what's going to happen, it was, hate speech was inadequately regulated everywhere, I would say. But with even less regulation, although in the US post the Jan 20 riots, there were actions taken for which they've de facto sort of everyone's apologized. So with a more hands-off kind of approach, big tech now has a free rein to really work on the pursuit of capital. So I don't really see positive things happening as such. So those are my thoughts.
Do you have anything to add, Rakib?
No, I think Rohit has already said what I wanted to.
Okay. Yeah. So another question that was posed by an audience member is, so we saw a lot of this narrative around a politics of love by the largest opposition party in India, the Congress. Was there any actual translation on the ground? We saw how the Constitution and the narrative around preserving it had some impact, but was love versus hate of any use? And then they said, again, Indian politics has been very dependent on social media image construction, so they want to understand how this worked out and if there was any impact.
Sure, I can answer that question. Out of all the events that we documented in 2024, 20% of the hate speeches, which is a very substantial number. Like if you go, because we did the data, so we know like how big of a number it is. It's a substantial number, and 20% of these speeches were delivered in states ruled by the opposition parties, mostly in the Congress. And states like Himachal Pradesh, where there's a Congress government in power right now, was among the top 10 states with most hate speech events. In fact, this campaign started in September to remove a lot of these Muslim places of the mosques across the state. And that campaign involved far-right mobilization, where they had also the local trade unions join in support, take out rallies calling for removal of Muslims from the state. And unfortunately, the government didn't take any action. Like there are leaders that we have been tracking for many years that have been as active as they were before. And unfortunately, that's a trend in that particular state. In the state of Telangana, where there was a BRS government before, and now there's Congress party in power, also witnessed a rise in hate speech between 2023 and 2024. And on the contrary, in the state of Karnataka, we did see a drop in hate speech events, but it's not significant. Like in 2023, there were only 32 hate speech events, and 2024, there were, in 2023, there were 40 hate speech events that we recorded. In 2024, there were just 32 hate speech events. And some of these were delivered during the election cycle, where we had BJP leaders from outside the state come in and deliver these hate speeches. So Karnataka also has shown willingness. Its Minister of Information, Priyanka, he has been very vocal on bringing in legislation, bringing in regulations, and forming bodies that would curb the online spread of hate speech. And the police has also shown willingness, and also the response of civil society has been very robust. So such things have played a good role in keeping a check on the growing hate within that particular state. But in general, the Congress ruled states have not shown a political will to seriously go after these hate actors who frequently engage in hate speech. And I remember in 2023, I think, Rahul Gandhi was visiting the US, and he was holding a press briefing at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. I was there at the event, at that briefing, and I asked, everyone was supposed to write their questions and give it to the moderator. And I wrote this question, that why should minorities vote for your party, considering there is a lack of political will by your chief ministers in the states ruled by the Congress in combating hate speech. We have documented hate speeches, we have documented hate crimes, especially back then the state of Rajasthan, which flipped from Congress to BJP in 2023. And the moderator cut out the last part and just asked the first part, that was, why should minorities vote for Congress? And minorities, especially Muslims, it was mentioned in the question, but Rahul Gandhi, without even mentioning the Muslims, just took another tangent. And I know that Muslim identity has been demonized to such an extent, where we see that a lot of these politicians from the Congress party are even scared to take spell out the word Muslim. So this speaks kind of, volumes about the demonization of the Muslim identity in the country.
And if I may just add to that, it's a very interesting question politically. And there's a debate between James Baldwin and Hannah Arendt about the role of love in politics in the context of desegregation, whether love should have a role or not. So I'll just mention a couple of other things, a couple of to complement what Rakib said. The first is that uh, I don't want to be cynical and suggest that the invocation of love was purely strategic. Maybe it was substantively well-intentioned. But it emerges because the Congress has had to abandon the word secularism because the BJP has very successfully managed to make the word secularism toxic through a long sort of history where, first the BJP would claim the Congress was pseudo-secular, but it was the only secular party. Now that term as a concept has, it's become an object of derision. That said, I think the kinds of values of pluralism, coexistence, or even syncretism, which is neither a fashionable word in media discourse nor in even some strands of academic progressive or left academic discourse, which just also see it as sort of thinly veiled form of Hindu hegemony or whatever. But whatever those terms signified, I think those, the social relations, I still think, though it has been weakened, though this poison is there in Indian society, there's still something of it. So, when you look at the number of people who joined Rahul Gandhi's yatra, uh, I think that to me gives me some hope and some succor. I think at the level of social relations, people are looking for a framework, and maybe the rhetoric and the politics of love or the invocation of mohabbat, it had some impact out there at the level of social relations. Now, the problem is how do you go from there to actually combating in the courts legally or as a political strategy this notion of hate, right? So, will speeches that emphasize love have that effect? As Raki put it, if Congress leaders are so terrified of mentioning the word Muslim, or mentioning the word Christian, or talking about the fact that this hatred is targeting Muslims and Christians, if they're so worried about essentially saying that, look, the BJP has managed to really create or redefine or is pushing towards redefining Hindu identity in a way today where being a Hindu or being an authentic Hindu is becoming closer to the Hindutva definition. Being an authentic Hindu by definition means, sort of denigrating minorities, flexing your Hinduism, this performative Hinduism, which everyone from celebrities to your average sort of bhakt troll or whatever has embraced. If you cannot counter that categorically, looking at it in the face through that rhetoric and politics of love in elections and rallies and in parliament, then to me that will have limited purchase. In the structures of formal political power. And I think that's the shortcoming. And I'll just end with the thought that the BJP has changed the rules of what is political capital. If some years ago Rahul Gandhi said, I'm a Shiv Bhakt, so the Congress leaders are also, trying to simultaneously show that, we are good Hindus and our, Hindu credentials should not be questioned. And in refusing to speak up against anti-Christian and anti-Muslim hatred, if they are implicitly endorsing and legitimizing the BJP definition that to be a good Hindu necessarily means to have an attitude of animosity towards other religious groups, then I think the politics of love will not achieve very much.
Yeah, well, thank you both for your response. So I think this will probably be our final question. So someone did ask, it was disappointing to see that Deccan Herald was the only mainstream Indian English language newspaper, which someone else added actually a link of the Hindu covering your report to report on your findings. And even then, its language was cautious, downplaying the issue. Despite this, major international outlets like CNN and BBC covered it more directly. What do you think accounts for this reluctance among Indian media to report on hate speech when it's such a significant social issue? And what steps are you, as the center, taking, if any, to address this? And then to follow up, did Deccan Herald contact you directly about your report?
I think Ash has asked two questions, I think, about the research part. We'll look into the email and we'll get back soon. Thank you for the reminder. And second, to your question on Deccan Herald, they didn't reach out to us. They published the editorial on their own. And that is very true that the mainstream Indian media has downplayed the entire issue, just ignored it altogether. And it is just so true to their roots because, I mean, they have been also very much the part of this entire problem. So how can we expect the source of this problem to kind of talk or initiate discussions around it? And I would say the regional media has played a very robust role, especially media in the South and in the North as well. These smaller players that cater to the regional audiences, and they have covered the report and they have been actually covering it. I was looking at some media reports today from the state of Tamil Nadu, from Karnataka, from Kerala, and they are discussing about the specific hate speech events that took place within their states. So this is definitely initiating conversation. And in fact, I remember 2023 when we released our first report, and when the Hindu covered it, and I know because back in time when I was studying, a lot of these people who prepare for civil services, they regularly read the Hindu newspaper. And when we released the reports, few days later, I was, looking online, and I found this one video of a civil services coaching center where the tutor was telling people, the students, about the hate speech report, how many events took place, and the laws and legislations in place to combat hate in the country. So I would say a lot of people don't know that hate speech is a big issue in the country because there is this deliberate attempt by the mainstream media to hide such reports, to hide such figures. But I think the regional media, as I said earlier, is playing a role, and the social media in itself is also playing a role. But the other side is also the perpetrators who are part of this problem. The supporters of the ruling party, the far right supporters, they are actually promoting disinformation, targeting both the message and the messenger. But in most cases, the messenger itself, because they know it's a rock solid report. They can't counter the facts that are in the report. So what they try to do is they just try to target me as the founder, as the executive director, as a Muslim, as a Kashmiri, because I hold these multiple identities that are very dangerous for people like myself, for journalists, Muslims, and Kashmiris to live in the country, in India, of course, and that's why I live in the US. Otherwise, this would have been shut down a long time back. I would be in Tihar right now for doing this work. So I think we will continue doing what we are doing. We just don't want to look at the problem part, but also look at the solution part, and that's why Rohit and we are working on a project to combat hate speech in India. How we can mobilize civil society, the community at large, have intra-community dialogue and interfaith dialogue to combat this dangerous escalation of hate speech in the country.
I know we're almost at time or at time. I always end with, a comment by Gramsci, which is pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. But, I also think that despite the body blows that Indian society has suffered, on the ground, there's people doing amazing work. I have this luxury and privilege of, being in the US. I understand it. So in their own way, in their own quiet way, there's, millions, tens of millions of like decent Indians going around doing the right thing every day. And, I think as Marcus Aurelius said, like this too shall pass. I mean, it will take time. It requires soul searching, and I don't say this as pontification. I don't exempt myself from any of this. I am a product of this society with its strengths and biases also. I've had some of these attitudes, perhaps they linger in a subconscious form. So this is not about, sort of preaching or being moralistic, but, about just accepting the truth and facts and then just moving on from there towards a better shared future. So I'll just end on that note.
Yeah, thank you both for answering all the questions so thoughtfully, and thank you to everyone who attended and who asked questions. We really appreciate it. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us for this panel discussion on India Hate Lab's 2024 report on hate speech events in India. Our team at CSOH is currently working on various reports on minorities across the South Asian region, as well as amongst the South Asian diaspora. And we also invite you all to join our mailing list and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and TikTok. Our handle is at CSOH, where we regularly post about upcoming events, reports, published pieces, and collaborations.